So, welcome everybody to the Friends of the Altadena Library annual meeting. I'm so glad everyone could join us. We have a quorum. Today we will be joined by Ann Miskey and Sean Morrissey of Union Station. First, we have a few minutes of business, a few things to attend to. We're going to have a presentation of our annual donation to the library this year. We have $15,000 that we will be giving to the Altadena Library to further their programs. So I am going to, Jeanette, do you have a check for us?
Oh, come on screen. Yes, I have that check.
Yay. I'm going to get a check from Jeanette.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize we were going to do it so soon. I'm just taking away this virtual background.
Oh, that's fine. We can use a little spiritual help for that. Yay. So I will receive that from Jeanette. And I'm going to hand this over to Victor from the Altadena Library, the Assistant Director. Victor, coming your way. Oh, yay, Victor.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you here to join us and to continue our program. Victor, do you want to give us a little presentation about things that are happening at the library this year?
Oh, and before you do that, just to clarify, what is the annual donation?
Oh, our annual donation this year is $15,000. $15,000 for the Altadena Library to further the programs of the Altadena Library. Unfortunately, we are not back into the library with our book sales and our usual means of acquiring money. This year, it's been all donations from friends. So we're happy to present that to the Altadena Library on behalf of the Friends of the Altadena Library.
Thank you so much, Marnie, and thank you to the Friends of the Altadena Library for this generous donation at a time when everything is a little bit different. That is certainly also that's also the through line for the presentation that I have for you here today. Let's see, I just want to make sure I can see you guys as well. So here we go. So yes, I am Victor Sjöberg. I'm the Assistant Library Director here at the Altadena Libraries. And I'm going to be speaking to you a little bit about how we utilized the donation that we received from you last year. We wanted to say thank you for this donation for 2021, and we want to thank you for the 2020 donation as well. And 2020 was a year of pivoting, a year of many changes and new challenges. With the pandemic and our need to rapidly adapt our library services, our team was very comforted and felt very safe knowing that we had the support of our friends behind us. And we want to again thank you for always making it possible for us to fulfill our mission of bringing people and ideas together at a time when we couldn't come together in the way that we normally do. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is how we adapted to change in terms of programming. So when in our previous request, we had talked about things such as second Saturday concerts, summer movie nights, and the Rita Dina book club. And we also talked about our newsletter printing. All of these things did not end up happening, unfortunately. We didn't have any large scale events with people because we couldn't get together in person. And there were no one was coming into our libraries, so there was no need to print a newsletter. But what we did instead was that we produced a lot of virtual events, including videos that really went viral. We had an interview with author Caitlin Dowdy, which has 16,000 views on our YouTube channel. And we had an interview with Mitch Horowitz, which has 11,000 views to date. So that's kind of a big reach for the programming that we've been doing. And there's something to be said with for the removal of geographic boundaries in terms of our programming. We were able to reach people all over the world with these videos. And I also want to share that our most viewed video was posted in early November of last year, and it was a introduction to cannabis cultivation. And it wasn't made by anyone famous. It was made by a community member here in Altadena. That video now has 32,000 views on our YouTube channel, and it's our most viewed video. So it's interesting to see where community knowledge and community interest intersect in that way, and we have a smash hit on our hands. We also did printing for other things. So when we started opening up our libraries again this year, we celebrated Library Week and promoted 10 ways that you can use your library card that were all ways that maybe people do not necessarily always think about. We also launched our Read Local, Shop Local program, which enables you to receive discounts and different deals at local businesses. At this point, we have 22 businesses all over Altadena enrolled in this program, and the program is still growing. And through the donation from the friends, we were able to do printing for these programs. And we also reached out to the friends and the foundation for feedback in terms of these top 10 ways to use your library card. So we also appreciate your participation in that way. We also have made big changes to our summer programming, where we normally have kids coming into our building during the summer. We had summer activity kits for our young ones, and we are doing the same thing this year. In fact, today is the first day of our summer program, which is launching for teens and youth today. We also actually had our first in-person program here just a few moments ago. We had a fully booked program, socially distanced, with a magician here in our garden. Another thing that I want to highlight is our upcoming programming, which has also been supported by the Friends donation. We are putting on 3 nights in June, 3 Thursdays, starting on June 10th. Where we're having big community dinners, by reservation only. So the first 2 have already filled up, but there are still spots available for the 3rd one, which takes place on June 24th. And I will post the link in the chat here for anyone that would like to register. Basically, what we're doing is that we're inviting the community back to the libraries for a dinner. So we're purchasing a dinner for each person from a local restaurant that's a part of the Read Local, Shop Local program. And we're treating them to a concert from a local band as well. And in between those 2 things, between the dinner and the concert, we're also going to sit down and have a conversation about community aspirations, community challenges, and just have an opportunity to reconnect and talk about maybe the things that we've gone through in the past year, and maybe the things that we would like to see for our community going forward. Another area that saw quite a bit of evolution in the past year was our support of the Altadena Poet Laureates. And the Friends donation made it possible for the laureates to create their own website, which is altadenapoetryreview.com. We have poetry posting there continuously each week, and I urge you to visit the site to take a look at the contributions so far. I'm really excited about the poets that we have on board with this program. It's a lot of new people, I think, as well, which also speaks to the way that we can market ourselves electronically and reach people that we normally wouldn't reach. So a very exciting change. And very near and dear to my heart is our adult literacy program and our English as a second language program. This was also supported by the Friends in the past year, and to really show the transformational work that goes on in our adult literacy program, I thought it would be best to hear directly from the learners and tutors themselves. So we have a little video here that I wanted to share with you.
This has been a very good change in my life because step by step I am achieving my goals.
I was looking for a place so I could learn how to read because throughout my life, I couldn't read. I couldn't fill out an application.
The activity should help me a lot.
I think it's important that programs like this should exist because literacy is vital to everyone's life and it's vital for freedom.
And I go to PCC in the high school program, and I'm going to graduate. I'm going to stay at PCC, get my associate, and then I'm planning on transferring to a four-year college, and so I can get my bachelor's. And the people in the library have been great.
I get tremendous gratification out of knowing that there is learning that's taking place and that perhaps I'm helping to make at least a little bit of difference in the lives of my students.
I really enjoy working with her, and I hope to continue until she reaches her goals.
This is my favorite teacher. That's the only teacher I was going to say. But she's great. She's great. She's great.
So that's our learners, literacy learners and tutors over at the Bob Lucas Library. And this video was put together by the Bob Lucas staff. And finally, I also want to express my appreciation for the Friends of the Library for their contributions to the Little Free Libraries. The library has in the past year started to deepen our relationships with stewards that own Little Free Libraries across the town, so that we can better support them as the network of literacy champions that they are in our community. So we're supplying them with books and also asking them, what kind of materials would you like for your library? Having a conversation about what are they seeing in terms of user patterns in their community, and how can the library be responsive to that? And I wanted to share a story of something that happened on Facebook the other week. Someone posted in the beautiful Altadena group that you might all be members of about their library being vandalized and stickers being ripped off, and they were expressing this concern about what was going on with their Little Free Library. And I stepped in and I said, please get in touch with me at my email address and we can see what we can do to help you. And this woman reached out to me, and she came in yesterday actually and picked up her a box of books from the Friends that we had compiled that included graphic novels and books on LGBT issues, and also books by writers of color, which are things that she emphasized were important to her. And so this is just one of the ways that we can see how the Friends of the Library through new ways have been supporting literacy and supporting the Altadena Library District this past year. So I want to thank you again, and yeah, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, even now that we've been isolated for so long. I joined the library in September, and I still have not met most of you in person. So I look forward to 2021 of meeting you all in person and getting to know all of you a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. We really do appreciate that. We appreciate so much what you've done for the Friends, getting the word out there and getting the books out there to the Little Free Libraries in the community. I think that's very important. So now the other big moment of business we have today. I wanted to thank all of you for your support and work this year. I know it's been a challenge being virtual and not getting together in the book room or meeting at the library each week like we did in the past. And it's been a little lonely in our little Zoom chats from time to time, but hopefully moving forward, we'll all be there together soon. But today we're going to have an election. We'll be handing the reins over to the next slate of officers. The projected or the people who have volunteered or been nominated for this year, for the next year moving forward, are Sally Cruz as president.
Hi.
Wave there, Sally. Joy Strayer, who's been a very dedicated volunteer for the last decade. Joy has volunteered to be vice president. She's been nominated and volunteered to be vice president. Jeanette Allen.
Here.
Been nominated as treasurer. Thank you so much, Jeanette. It's a thankless job, I know. And our recording secretary for next year will be Claire Newman. As we do our Zoom, as we Zoom forward for a few more months or a few more weeks. So that is the slate, projected slate from the Friends of the Altadena Library for next year. May I have a vote? All in.
Well, I make the motion that we accept the slate as presented.
Thank you so much. May I have a motion from Mark Mariscal, who has kept us, another key supporter who has kept us on, kept us in order for the last couple of years. Is there a second there? Thank you, Barbara. All in favor? Could you raise your hand? Aye or wave? Aye.
A couple of hands. I have.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much. I would say the motion passes. The new slate is elected as proposed. Thank you all so much for your support for the last year. It's been a difficult year on so many fronts. We've lost several important friends in the last year. Excuse me. We've lost several members of our group in the last year. And going forward will be different, I know, without the support of some of them. But I'm looking forward to seeing everybody back in the library next year. And Sally, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
Yay.
Thanks, Marnie. You've been big boots to follow.
So, Sally, shall I introduce our next our speaker?
I actually we thought that Claire, in fact, should invite the guest because she's been the force behind it.
Yes, Claire and Jeanette have definitely been a force behind this program. So I'd like to thank Claire and Jeanette for all of their dedicated work this year, getting us to this point. I'd like to thank Sally for all of the dedicated work she's done as this year as secretary and going forward next year as president. I know she'll do a great job. I feel very secure turning the reins over to Sally and Joy. So Claire, for the presentation today.
I just would like to make a point of clarification. For this particular project, Claire has done it all on her own. She's the big force behind it. I have not been involved in this specific aspect, so I want to give her all the credit.
Okay, I think it was a joint effort between many of us who wanted to have more talks on these kinds of issues, and so Jeanette, you've definitely been the big force behind that. So I think we're just very happy that we're doing this again, because we had a very good talk last year, and now we have another two amazing speakers this year. And on that note, I also wanted to say Marnie has done a fantastic job, and it's going to be tough to carry on without her, but she won't be going anywhere, right?
Anywhere. Nope, I'm still working, and I'll still be in Altadena for, yes.
Good. It just would not be the same. I don't know the Friends without Marnie. All right, so moving on to our next item, I am delighted to introduce our two speakers today. Ann Miskey is the CEO of Union Station Homeless Services, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization and is the lead agency coordinating homeless services in the San Gabriel Valley, which people might not have known, and helping individuals and families to end homelessness and rebuild their lives. And formerly served as CEO at the Downtown Women's Center, and she's worked on First Lady Michelle Obama's Joining Forces initiative in support of veterans, and has helped develop a national strategy on youth homelessness. Most recently, she was appointed to Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo's Housing Task Force. Sean Morrissey is Union Station's Senior Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement and has 16 years, at least, of experience in the field of homeless advocacy, service provision, and social justice, with a focus on mental health and substance use disorders. A tireless advocate for permanent supportive housing solutions, Sean is a recognized voice in the homeless sector on the local and national stage. So Anne and Sean, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you, friends of the Altadena Library. We're thrilled to be able to be here today. Thank you so much. I am going to try to share my screen, so just give me 2 seconds until I make sure that it's up and working properly. And just give me 2 seconds and we'll get it there. Can everybody see the presentation okay? Always a bonus when technology works.
Perfect.
So Sean and I are going to take you through a bit of a journey today, a journey into homelessness. It's obviously a huge issue across the country, but especially here in Southern California, and especially in Los Angeles County. I don't think you can go anywhere nowadays without seeing people experiencing homelessness, living in tents and encampments, under bridges, etc. And it is a constant topic of conversation in the media, in the news media. And there are a lot of myths out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the issue, about what is working, what is not working to end homelessness. So we're going to run through a lot of information today. There is going to be time for questions afterward. Although if you have a clarifying question and something we've said, feel free to put it in the chat and we can probably address it right then. So I am going to launch into this, and Sean and I are going to be doing this together. So he'll be talking in a second. So I want to start talking a little bit about homelessness. We all know kind of what that is, right? Somebody who is without a home and often living on the streets or in shelters. The picture that you have here is what most people think of when they think of homelessness. Again, those people that you see on the streets. There is actually a federal definition of homelessness. So all of our work, all the funding that is done is really done in conjunction with federal law and federal definitions of homelessness. So they group them in populations, and the funding streams and the resources and the solutions are very different for each of those funding streams, each of those groups. So it's individuals, families, youth, and youth is 16 to about 24, and then our veteran population. So those are our main categories of people experiencing homelessness. Now, if you look at this chart, it tells you what we're looking at. Again, this is nationally. This is a point in time, one night a year. They do a count across the whole country to determine how many people on that night were experiencing homelessness. You can see the numbers are just shy of 600,000 across the country. Again, remember, that's on one night. That does not count all the people falling into homelessness throughout the year or who may be getting housed. So we know the number is actually much greater than that 500,000. If you look, the biggest population are individuals, followed by people in families, and then this chronically homeless number. What do we mean by chronically homeless? These are people who have, again, there's an actual federal definition. You have to have been homeless for 1 or more years or have fallen into homelessness numerous times over a 3-year period. So when you see that picture of that person, living in the encampment, often that's these chronically homeless population. Go to Skid Row, you will see that people who have been repeatedly homeless or homeless for many, many years. They are actually a relatively small percentage of the total numbers. Most people experiencing homelessness you don't ever see. Okay, so they're living in cars, they're living in places, maybe abandoned buildings. Youth, for example, you don't see them, and often you rarely see families experiencing homelessness. So we have this picture that it's all of these people who are, quote unquote, mentally ill. That's actually a very small percentage. Veterans population, there is a success story. The number of veterans experiencing homelessness during the Obama administration went down by around 60%, completely ended their homelessness during those years because there was a real focus. And a lot of those folks were part of this chronically homeless population. So that has been a success story across the country, although sadly over the last few years, we saw that number start to go back up. One of the things we'll talk briefly about is the issue of race. Racism is a major cause of homelessness. And you can see that if you look at the numbers here, about 70% of the population in this country identifies as white. And that's the number, 270,000 people experiencing homelessness who are white. 13% of the population is African American. The numbers are close. A far higher percentage of African Americans experience homelessness than any other group. We're seeing growing numbers of Latino Hispanics also experiencing homelessness. Traditionally, way more men were homeless than were women. Sadly, we're seeing the numbers of women begin to dramatically increase. At one time, it was fewer than 10% were women. Now we're getting, in many parts of the country, getting close to 40% of the population are women. Usually, those are heads of household. They are women with small children, one of the fastest growing numbers in the homeless population. The other fastest growing population, seniors. People who have mostly been housed their whole lives, often have worked or have been married, and because of the high cost of rents are now falling into homelessness in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of the history of homelessness, because you may be surprised to know that homelessness is a modern phenomenon. It really did not exist except in very small cases in the history of this country. You know, the picture of the hobo walking the rails, there were a few guys who kind of wandered around the country. During the Depression, we did see a spike in homelessness, but it was not because of the lack of housing or the cost of housing. Homelessness was an issue of people on the hunt for jobs across the country. So homelessness really did not begin until the late 1970s. 1970s and 1980s, we had practically no homelessness before that. By about 1983 and 84, there were well over 1 million people in this country experiencing homelessness in just a handful of years. Why? Well, one of the long-term, but it arose, was the high cost of housing, was redlining. So redlining, if you don't know what that is, they would literally draw red circles around certain areas. Traditionally, Black African-American populations lived in certain areas. And if you lived in that redlined area, you could not get loans, you could not get mortgages, you could not purchase a home. So you were kept out of the housing market. As the cost of housing went up and you're a renter, the chances are you'll start to lose your homes. Sean.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for having us. Yeah, the war on drugs and mass incarceration, it's one that we don't, I think, often think about when we're talking about one of the drivers into homelessness. But it absolutely is. Anytime someone is entered into or entangled in the legal system or incarceration system, that is a creator and driver into homelessness. And kind of, I like to think of the vehicle by which we accomplish mass incarceration is really the war on drugs, which is a phenomenon that we've had in this country for the past 50 or so years. Drug policy, American drug policy, is racist in nature. In the way that these laws are applied to specific groups of people. We have in the United States, we hold 5% of the world's population, but we incarcerate 25% of the world's incarcerated population. The war on drugs is actually a war on people, and mostly people of color. You know, it relies on, it props up the prison industrial complex, basically, which relies on bodies to fill it and make a profit, and most of those are brown and black bodies. So when we talk about homelessness, we can't talk about one of the drivers or one of the systems into it without talking about the war on drugs and mass incarceration.
Just a note, if you're Black, you are 57% more likely to be incarcerated for a drug crime than if you are white. And yet they've done studies to show that Blacks and whites use drugs, illegal drugs, in equal amounts. So that shows you right there. Eviction. There's a really interesting book was done a few years ago saying that eviction is to African-American women what incarceration is to African-American men. The #1 group being evicted across the country are women of color with small children under the age of 5. If you are an African-American woman and you haven't paid rent on time, the average length of time before you receive an eviction notice is 7 days. If you are a white male who doesn't pay your rent, your average time to receive an eviction notice is 6 months. So that will show you again. And once you receive an eviction on your record, it becomes increasingly hard to rent any place to live. And what happens is you see a downward spiral. So the next apartment you get is in a worse area, fewer services, and it gets worse and worse and worse until finally people can't rent at all and they're on the streets. And again, the #1 group being hit are African-American women with young children being forced out onto the streets.
The other thing that was one of the huge drivers initially into homelessness was deinstitutionalization of mental health systems and state hospitals. It started with under Jimmy Carter in 1980, the Mental Health Systems Act, which was a progressive effort to basically take folks who were languishing in state hospitals, help them get out of those hospitals, bring them back into the community, and create a community mental health system that would not only absorb the numbers of people leaving state hospitals, but also effectively treat them. The reason this largely came about was the advent of newer psychotropic medications that were having prodigious results. And the idea was that we didn't have to house people or warehouse people in state hospitals. We could bring them back to their families, bring them back to the communities, treat them effectively with these medications, and create a mental health system that would help them do that. On the heels of that was the Reagan administration's Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981, which basically took a lot of that money that was going to be used to create those mental health systems. And so the first part absolutely did happen. We defunded and deinstitutionalized state hospitals, and the second part in 2021 has yet to happen. So 40 years later, we have not realized the dream of creating a mental health system that could help people thrive in their own communities. Those systems are still highly barrier and impediment ridden even today.
Then, of course, at this same time in the early 70s, mid 70s, we saw the end of the Vietnam War. We saw the veterans coming back, many of them experiencing PTSD. And what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of them were treated with drugs while they were in service, pharmaceutical drugs, but then they got out of the service and suddenly they were addicted to this medication and couldn't get access to it. So you ended up having a lot of untreated PTSD, a lot of drug addiction that was actually caused, they were treated with these drugs. And so we saw, and very little support for our veterans. So a large percentage in the early days of the chronically homeless population were veterans. Fortunately, during the Obama administration, what we saw happen was the Departments of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the VA came together and did some joint programs to make sure that all veterans had access to housing and services. So that was one of the main reasons we saw the decline in veterans homelessness. But we still see veterans, and PTSD is still a real issue with a lot of people experiencing homelessness who went through the war. Another little fact that is shocking, but a lot of women veterans are now beginning to experience homelessness. And a lot of them cannot access benefits, VA benefits. Why? Because they reported military sexual harassment and trauma, and as a result, received dishonorable discharges because they reported it. They were the victims, reported it, and got discharged from the military and then can't access services. So now there are legal services working with a lot of these women, but it's pretty shocking to think that you're the one penalized.
And of course, gentrification, as we know, is also a huge driver into creating homelessness, skyrocketing rents, people being, as Anne talked about, people being priced out of their homes that they've grown up in or for generations been in, especially seniors with static incomes as rents are being raised, are being priced out of their longtime homes.
This has been a huge issue, obviously, in California. Now, one of the #1 causes of homelessness was the disinvestment in affordable housing. We talk about what is the solution to homelessness. Guess what, folks? It's homes. If you have a home, you're not homeless. That's as simple as that. But when you can't afford a home, so again, this was under the Reagan years. This quote is from him: "Let the churches look after the poor." He also made statements that it was the fault of people, if they're poor or homeless, it's their own fault. So he did a dramatic disinvestment. You can see here the federal spending in 1 year went from 26 billion to 8 billion, and then was eroded even more after that. So from over 500,000 units of affordable housing per year, we went to 9,000 units, and those numbers have continued to plummet over the years. Federal government cut and continued to cut for many years all assistance around housing. It was during the 80s that housing went from something everybody had, it was a human right, it was just people had houses, to housing became a commodity. It became a pathway to wealth. And of course, who are kept out of that are people who are already poor, people of color, people with disabilities. All of those things are kept out of housing, period. So again, all of these things together created a system. From the early 70s, there was practically no homelessness in America. Within just over 10 years, we blossomed to well over 1 million. Some estimates are over 2 million people experiencing homelessness in this country. And it was all a direct result of all of these policies. It was nothing to do with people making personal bad choices. It was about the policies that drove way too many of our citizens into homelessness.
Yeah, and to help kind of drive that home even more, I think, we talk a lot about this idea that we have mistakenly put the blame on the individual who's experiencing the problem as the one who created it. And what we're really trying to highlight here is that, 40 years ago, it wasn't that people started making bad decisions en masse and landed in these situations. There are fundamental failures and breaks in systems and structures. Some that have been around for hundreds of years, and some that have been around more recently, that actually caused the problem that we're looking at in the numbers that we started to see. So some of the systemic causes of homelessness, just to go over this again, lack of affordable housing. That's the thing we struggle with the most. We have hundreds, thousands of people holding housing vouchers. We have, I'd say 90% of the folks who are experiencing street homelessness are in our system waiting to get into housing, but there is absolutely no housing. People are losing their housing vouchers because they're only good for 6 to 8 months, and then after that they expire. And you can't find housing in 6 to 8 months in the numbers needed. Poverty, low-paying jobs, job loss, racial disparity, racist systems. And, you know, one of the biggest ones that we're going to talk about too is just this inaccessibility into the kind of upstream interventive systems that are supposed to catch a lot of these issues at the outset before they turn into homelessness. So when we talk about, you hear a lot people say, you know, the root causes of homelessness are mental illness and addiction issues, for instance. And we think of those as symptoms of larger systemic issues, broken systems, failed systems. Those are actually things that can be threats to housing stability, but they don't have to be and shouldn't be the driver into homelessness or a cause of homelessness. So threats to housing stability are of course, physical and mental health, domestic violence, addiction, and then trauma, which, you know, the emerging research shows can lead to all of these various things. And of course, trauma on the street, once you become homelessness, is just exacerbated and in and of itself becomes a whole other issue. So when we're talking about threats to housing stability, what we're really talking about, that the reason any of those things result in actual street homelessness is because of the top layer and the systems that are supposed to catch these things before they turn into homelessness. You know, a good example of some of that would be that if you are someone who has a substance use disorder and you're on the street and you would like to get help for that, it can literally take a month to 4 months to get into a detox bed or a treatment bed. If you have a mental health issue and you want to take medication, it can take 3 months to get in front of a psychiatrist to receive medication. So oftentimes we're talking about how, you know, the help is really out there if people would just avail themselves of it. They could get what they need. And we know that to be absolutely not true. The help is not out there. I've made calls to try to get someone linked to a mental health community provider and been told, you know, not even that I have to wait 3 months, but there are absolutely 0 slots available for them to even assess or see anybody. That was the case, you know, 40 years ago, and it's largely the case today in 2021. Yeah, I think that covers it for this slide.
Thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit about what the response is to homelessness. So when we saw the numbers first start to go up in the early 1980s, it was pretty visible at the time. Some of you may be old enough to remember, but who were the first to respond? Well, it was faith groups. They were the ones that said, hey, this is not good. That's how Union Station got our start. It was the local All Saints Church in Pasadena who had some parishioners who said, we're starting to see people out in the streets. So they started what we fondly refer to as the 3 hots in a cot. So it's a shelter bed. You usually have to line up, first come, first serve. You'd have to be out first thing in the morning, and meals. But these grew up all over the country. There was no coordination and there was no endpoint. I always say they were trying to make people feel as comfortable as possible in their homelessness, but it wasn't the idea of getting out of homelessness. It was a humanitarian response to a crisis situation. What did we see across the country? Shelters started to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It was like there was no back door. You just added more shelter beds, more feeding programs. Pet peeve of mine, whenever I see things that say feed the homeless, I'm like, for God's sakes, how's the homeless? Feed the hungry, how's the homeless? So this was the response that was early on, very humanitarian, done out of real compassion, did not solve the problem. The problem continued to grow. Again, what happened then, because the problem continued to grow, is people started to get tired of it and they started to resent it. And they said something has to be done about these homeless people. They're all over the streets. They're in my backyard. I don't like this. They're peeing and defecating all over. We hear this all the time. Sound familiar? Yeah, this happened in the 1990s too. And what happened, and LA was the center of some of this, was what was called the broken window policy. In other words, you started arresting people for minor offenses, usually offenses like trespassing, peeing on the streets, having an open bottle of liquid on the streets or wine, you know, whatever. And you started to criminalize people. And so basically you criminalized people out of existence because there was nowhere they could go that it was legal for them to be, but they didn't have housing. So you put them in jail. What happens? They now have a criminal record. So now it's almost impossible for them to get into housing or to get a job because that's on their record. And often they can't pay fines. So they have huge fines that keep multiplying. And what you're doing is the jail became this revolving door. And having worked in Skid Row, really common, people in the jail would let people out at 3 a.m. and they just take them to Skid Row and dump them. And you know that 3 months later, they were probably being arrested again and sent back to jail. So this was the response. Sadly, this is what we're seeing start to happen again. This is what we are seeing right now in LA County, is this return to forcing them into service, or we're going to arrest you. Folks, not only does it not work, this actually caused huge spikes in homelessness and long-term chronic homelessness for a lot of people. So this is a scary prospect that we're starting to see happen again in LA County.
Yeah, as Ann said, the sentiment today is that the misidentification of people suffering from mental illness or substance use has led to this idea that the solution to homelessness is to force people to comply in order to earn their way off the street. That is the old model. It's what grew the numbers to what we're seeing today. When I first started working in homeless services, I worked at an access center in Pasadena. And the rule there was, in order to get a shelter bed, in order to get any help at all, you had to be completely abstinent of any substances, which meant that even if you were a social drinker and you were to have a cocktail or a beer while you were staying in the shelter, regardless of whether or not you were an alcoholic or had an issue with that, you would be exited from the program. Imagine that happening in any of your own homes. You know, if someone likes to enjoy a cocktail after work. You had to be abstinent from all substances. You had to be what we called med compliant, which is to say that if you had a mental health diagnosis, you had to be receiving treatment, you had to be taking medication, you had to be meeting with your caseworker. There were so many hoops to jump through. And what that meant was that the folks who were of the highest capacity and had the fewest complexities or challenges were the ones who were able to move through the system, get a job, and be able to afford market rate housing. Because back then, as early as the mid 2000s, homes were not a part of homeless services. It wasn't a resource that we had access to. So if anybody was homeless, basically you had to kind of get your shit together enough to be able to get a job and be able to afford market rate housing. And the only way you would be allowed to move through those stages would be to be highly compliant. So when I worked at this access center, God forbid anyone actually came in and asked for drug or alcohol treatment or asked to see a psychiatrist, because like I said, again, it could take months to affect any one of those things. Luckily, and Ann's going to get into this a little bit, we changed the models and we changed the way that we do things. And over the course of that, in the past 10 years or so, we have seen huge reductions in the number of folks who are homeless. We've housed more folks than ever before in the history of homeless services. But as we're also going to talk about, based largely upon macroeconomic issues and inaccessibility to treatment, we're seeing higher numbers. I think one of the statistics we see is that 207 people per day resolve their homelessness, with 227 falling newly into homelessness who had never experienced homelessness before. Again, these are not people who are making bad decisions. We're talking about a whole bunch of complex issues here when we're talking about why that's happening.
Great, thank you, Sean. And as Sean alluded to, a number of years ago, everybody started going, this is not working. The system we've created that's just a hodgepodge of different agencies all over, some government funding here, lots of rules. I always say to people, try imagining having to navigate the DMV times 100. That's what we're asking people living on the streets to do, to navigate all of these different systems and bureaucracies to try to resolve their own homelessness. So finally, and it was a bipartisan issue, believe it or not, one of the few, where both sides of the House and Senate came together and said, okay, we have to figure something out. We have to work together. And so you had the federal government under Housing and Urban Development Department start to coordinate the system around homelessness around the country. And they also said, we want to look at solutions, not just sheltering people, because the shelter system is outrageously expensive. Even more expensive than the shelter system is leaving people on the streets. It costs the taxpayer millions of dollars to leave someone on the street versus putting them in housing. So when you hear people complain about, oh, they get free housing, you're actually saving the taxpayer a lot of money by doing that. So they started to develop this coordinated system. We saw this happen here in Los Angeles because Los Angeles was completely dysfunctional as a system around homelessness. It was one of the reasons it grew to the numbers it did. County blamed the city of Los Angeles, city blamed the county, nobody would take responsibility, nobody would do anything. A number of years ago, the city and the county finally came together and created a coordinated system. And as Sean mentioned, we saw record numbers of people being housed. Last year, 22,000 people got permanently housed in LA. The issue again was trying to keep up with the massive inflow. So Sean, you want to talk to us about the systems approach?
Yes. So, and to answer the question I just saw in the box, basically it costs more money to leave someone on the street based upon all of the response services that have to happen. So you're talking about emergency response, you're talking about city response, cleanup, the police response, anytime someone is arrested for a minor offense, like Anne talked about, something that would, you know, a lot of us have the access, the privilege of accessing, you know, bathrooms. So we're not having to figure out how to use bathrooms outside. So jails, hospitals, emergency room visits, all of those things amount to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think one of the statistics I heard, and I think one of the slides refers to that, this $1 million Murray, it's a cost study was done basically on what it costs to leave someone chronically homeless on the street. And I think the average cost of the last study I read was somewhere around $50,000 to $60,000 a year, leaving someone chronically homeless on the street, what it costs to affect all of those services, as opposed to the $20,000 to $24,000 it costs to bring someone in, provide them with a subsidy of which they pay 30% for their rent, and provide intensive wraparound permanent support services. So it's a fraction or half of the cost of what it takes to leave someone on the street. In the old days, the idea was we didn't really even have a prevention system in place. Basically, we waited till people became homeless. We created a whole emergency shelter system, the largest of which was in Los Angeles. And again, those folks who could jump through all the hoops could get a job and work their way out of that system. People who couldn't languished. And then what we've moved to now is this focus on ending homelessness as opposed to just creating emergency system. So the emergency shelter piece became the smaller part of it. The prevention piece became larger. And then the focus on homes as the actual solution to homelessness and added to that the intensive support services that help people stay in their homes and retain their homes. Doing that, we now have what is a 97% success rate in Pasadena with all of our programs. When we help folks who have been on the street for many, many years get into housing, a 97% retention rate in that they keep their housing, they begin to thrive and become members of the community. So working under these new systems, which are highly relational, very different from the clinical and therapeutic models and the enforcement models of the past. The models today basically say that human beings thrive in an environment of connection with other human beings and authentic relationships. And so our models are imbued and, shot through with all of those types of things. Everything that we do is person-centered and person-focused, and it starts with the relationship that you build with human beings to help move them forward. Without that, nothing happens.
Yeah, and that's what we call the housing first model, and people will have heard of it. And you hear a lot of myths about housing first, that somehow housing first is the idea that people can do whatever they want. And basically housing first is saying that housing is the platform for stability. And once you have stable housing and food, you can then work on what other issues you have. But just like you or I have to behave in a certain way in our own homes, whether it's a rental home or the home we purchased, you can't be having wild parties that disturb your neighbor, and you can't be destroying property and those things. These people are held to these same standards, no different than any of the rest of us. But again, we know that this system works. It's highly, highly effective. And again, these are some of the types of housing. I won't go into it in depth. You may have heard, however, about a new model called Project Home Key. And I did want to mention that because it's a really successful new initiative done here in California. The state and the city of LA combined money to purchase a number of hotels. They then turned these hotels into interim or temporary housing for people. So you could immediately get people off the streets and into safe, clean rooms with their own bathrooms. And in 3 to 5 years, those buildings are all going to be turned into permanent supportive housing. So we were very fortunate to have 2 of these hotels. We got contracts for 2 of them in El Sereno. We were able to, with the support of outreach workers, get 2 encampments completely off the streets and into the hotels. And it's been incredibly successful to get all of these people within a period of 3 months and now on the path to permanent housing. So the model has been fantastic in that it's relatively cost effective compared to building from scratch. And it also happened in 3 months opposed to about a 5-year span for building housing. So it's been incredibly successful. So I know our time is running out, but just a couple more. So really, what does work to end homelessness for people? Sean, did you want to speak to this one?
Sure. Yeah, we have a path through, and we know that this is what absolutely works. These are our newest evidence-based models and best practices. It again starts with building authentic relationships with human beings, not enforcing or mandating or forcing people to be in a place where they're not at the moment. Creating accessible services. Also having crisis and emergency responses to all of those things available to people and accessible to people. And then, housing. That's what the end goal is. We have to have housing, but not only housing, right? People have to be a part of community. They have to be able to make a livable wage. Access to health, community integration, all of those things that kind of make our lives whole and work for us and helping us be happy, productive, thriving humans are the same things that we need to give to folks who are on the street. And the idea here is to normalize the housing process, not create programs with hoops that people have to jump through. Because at the end of the day, I get to go home and I get to lock my door, and I don't have to meet with a case manager. I don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. And if I have struggles, I have a support system in place to help me with that.
And again, the community integration piece is really important because one of the things we do know about people, and this has been studied a lot is that people rise to the level of their community. In other words, if you put someone in a place of health and there's a connection to other human beings, it lifts people up. And so that community connection with people, and so a lot of the work that our case managers do or volunteers do is connecting people to their local faith groups. Libraries, let me tell you about libraries and homelessness. They are a lifeline for people. So these are the kinds of things that really make home successful for these folks, is all of these other things on top of having that stable housing. Now, in conclusion, and I don't know if we just want to open it up to some questions now, or we also, there are some myths that are out there. And so we can maybe just do these in context of some questions and answers. But, or Sean, did you want to talk to a couple of these?
Yeah, I think I can knock this out in about two minutes. I think that this will resonate with people. I'll say this, that, you know, what all of this is about humanizing folks who are living on the street, about helping us see people as the human beings that they are, with hopes, longings, dreams, exactly the same as all of ours. And that gets lost in the actual physical presentation of homelessness. You know, the reason I do this work is, I often say, because I wasn't really qualified to do any other work. And I wound up here in 2002 as a homeless man with, you know, almost 30 years of IV drug use and trauma, which later turned into homelessness. And if you had seen me, you know, those almost 19 years ago, you would have crossed to the other side of the street, because, you know, I looked like any homeless person looks. You know, anybody who has to sleep outside and experience the trauma of homelessness, we take on a different physical presentation, but that's just the outward appearance of homelessness. In the 16 years that I've been doing this direct service work on the street, I've yet to meet someone who did not want their own home, their own bathroom, their own kitchen, their own bedroom. We hear oftentimes people are choosing this lifestyle. I haven't met anybody who has chosen this lifestyle. What we haven't offered are homes for people who are experiencing homelessness. And once we started doing that, everybody accepted, and everybody does accept. People aren't service resistant. You'll hear that a lot. Basically, we've created systems that are barrier ridden, that cannot bend to meet the needs of the individual. Rather, we require that they bend to meet the requirements of the program. As we covered, you know, a small percentage of people have mental illnesses and drug addictions. And those are matched in numbers, or outmatched in numbers, by people who have never been homeless, who suffer from those same things in the privacy of their own homes. So the largest number of untreated drug addicts and people with untreated mental illness are living in homes, have never been homeless, and probably will never be homeless, because they have the resources or support network that helps them stay in housing. And that the majority of people experiencing homelessness are from here, that we know that to be true. People don't move around for the most part when they become homeless. They don't go to different cities. They tend to stay where they grew up, where they know where their family members are, where their support services are. A very small percentage of people travel outside of the area where they became homeless. And, you know, as Anne talked about a lot, we can't arrest our way out of homelessness. In fact, that is the very problem that grew the numbers that we see today. So these are just some of the myths that are out there. They're hard to combat because they keep coming up over and over again, but I can absolutely tell you from working at the ground level that these things are not true, that what we're really talking about here is not people creating problems, but systems still failing people in the ways that they shouldn't be. That was way longer than 2 minutes, but there it is.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to end the slides now. And sorry, stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you so much. That was really, you know, educational doesn't do it justice, but, you know, like, mind-blowing in many ways. And I've heard some of that stuff before. I've heard quite a bit of it before, and I still always learn something new. I know Mark Mariscal posted that he had a couple of questions. So basically, perhaps if people want to put in chat if they have a question, and then I can call on people in order. So Mark, do you want to carry on?
So mute me after 75 seconds. So 1, Anne followed Howard Kahn, who was the interim CEO, who is married to Betsy, who was on our trustees as we did the whole transaction of getting a new board of trustees. So, Anne's been around for a little bit now. I would say that as part of St. Elizabeth Catholic Church and the things that our church does, and I lead the Union Station ministry at our church, and I know Jeanette and her church actually do some things with Friends Indeed and maybe with you guys too. And then I'm an Altadena Rotarian, so we do some things that way, and so it's really been good from that. But I would say that, I know you did another presentation just in the last week or two with the mayor and some other stuff or some other people, but California went from 20 million people in 1970 to, we're almost at 40 million or something. LA County went from 7 million in 1970, somewhere around there, which at the time was more than a third of the state population. Now it's at 10 million, so it's like 25%. So part of it really is this influx of people, right? Whether it's migration from other states or migration from other countries, the idea is there are just a lot more people, which makes that whole challenge of households and buildings and apartments. And so it was really a very smart move by the state of California to deal with buying hotels, because motels, part of it also then got, I'm hoping, some of the slave trade and some of the sex trade out of those buildings that were run down motels. And so, people don't realize that there's this whole combination that actually can make a community better, because there are some places that did not want some of these motels purchased, and not in my backyard was a giant thing. So here are my quick questions are, I think you should not just with us, but your newsletter that goes out on volunteers and your other stuff should just be automatic to every library in the San Gabriel Valley. And maybe it already is, but I don't think it is.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think you ought to try that. So if that's possible. And then maybe an easier thing is that when you do deal with some of the groups, those people that do want to sign up for your email volunteer blast, which is a nice, simple thing. And so it takes an organization like us. And sometimes I'll take my Rotary Club and say, okay, look, I know the Family Center needs dinner this night. And so we did that during COVID, which was really a great time. We had not done that before. Now there's other, the Pasadena and the After Hours Pasadena do those. So anyway, I throw that out to our members that are left, but also that, a Claire and a Sally could then send that information to all of our friends saying, here's a good link for signing up for Union Station, just to read their newsletter, whether it means you're going to help with the whole homeless crisis or you're going to fight the not in my backyard issue or whatever you're going to do, you need to be educated, because you're always going to hear people on both sides, but facts are facts. And I wish people would realize that facts are facts. Anyway.
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and great ideas, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you mentioned about the hotels. There was huge, we took over 2 Project Room Key hotels, which were different. They were hotels that were rented during COVID to help people who were vulnerable to COVID get off the streets. And we were in Monterey Park. I remember being there one day, and there's a huge demonstration, people circling in their cars with "get out of here, go away, we don't want you here," people, just the nicest view of humanity. And to see this, and then we had the politicians saying, yeah, we don't want this here. We now have the city council at Monterey Park going, this was amazing. The police love it. One of the city councilors has spoken to webinars we've had saying that it was transformative for their city. Same thing here in El Sereno, where we opened the 2 Project Home Key hotels. The anger on Nextdoor, and the number of comments were about all the people in the encampments, and that they're all service resistant. They've been offered stuff and they don't want it. And then we had the hotels. They all instantly moved into the hotels. So they weren't resisting anything. They didn't have any place to go. And now the community is celebrating the fact that we have these hotels. So, you put people in humane situations, and it transforms not only their lives, but the community as a whole. And I wish people could see that. But the fear that people have is intense.
Sally has a question.
Yeah.
Sally.
Sorry. Yes. I was wondering about the early days of COVID and what the response was. It must have been so impossible, seems so impossible to me, to help people when you had to be distanced and.
Yeah. It was a challenge, and it was a weird thing. I don't know if anyone else felt this, but it seemed like it was like this thing coming from the east, right? Do 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 do. It's on its way. It's on its way, and then it felt like it was like it's here. It's instant. It was this really weird phenomenon. I remember March 13th, we were closed down, but we had to continue serving people because people who are experiencing homelessness. What did they tell you at COVID? Stay home, stay safe. Okay, what happens if you don't have a home? So we were really fortunate. We work with USC Keck School of Street Medicine, and they were amazing in helping us navigate how to respond. And they were giving us much better, much clearer information than we were getting from the CDC, who seemed to be changing things every day, Department of Health. And what the folks at USC Keck said is, don't listen to that. It's not safe enough what they're telling you. You got to be safe. So we immediately all, remote workers, anybody who could, but our outreach folks, we would only let them go out with full PPE, the really good PPE. We did knock, drop, and what was it? We would provide food. Our food distribution went up to about 2,000 meals a week to 8,000 meals a week that we were providing people and distributing. But we would knock on someone's door. These were people who were newly housed. Put the food there, stand back, make sure they got it. You okay? Can we help you? So we had all of these things that we did to keep people safe. We put hundreds of people into hotel rooms. We decompressed our shelter because you can't have a bunch of people in a room together. It's not safe. So we put people in hotel rooms. So we kept going and we kept our staff safe, really strict. We were incredibly strict with our staff about, how to interact with people. And all our staff said, thank you. You're keeping us safe. And then we had the fires hit. Remember all the fires last year? And we had to add that on top of it. We're like, what's next? Alien invasion, I'm sure. But we managed to get through it. A lot of generosity from people because the costs skyrocketed because of having to do things new ways. But so there was a lot of generosity. But the one good thing I think that came out of COVID is it lit a fire under people, and we started seeing solutions that we'd never seen before, but all in the name of COVID. But the hotels are a perfect example of a solution that's been amazing. If it hadn't been for COVID, I don't think we would have done that. So there's been some silver lining in a pretty horrible year.
That is really amazing. I was going to ask that because I got the impression you were talking about two hotel programs, and you said one was COVID and one wasn't, or did I misunderstand that? So one was COVID and one was afterwards, or?
Yeah, so the Project Room Key was the COVID response. So you had to be someone vulnerable to COVID. You had to be over a certain age or have some kind of physical issue that put you in that class of high risk folks. And they rented these hotel rooms, and they had, I think it was about 4,000 hotel rooms across the county. And we had 2 of the hotels. But then they went, hey, these hotels working, and there were a lot of hotel owners who'd lost so much business that they were in trouble financially. So that's when the state stepped in and purchased the hotels, and the people moving into the hotels are still highly vulnerable, but it didn't have to be about COVID. It was just generally about people who were vulnerable and homeless. So it was the evolution of one to the other, but the second one, and the state has announced $8 billion to expand this program. And if I can brag a little bit about Union Station, we were used as the gold standard for the 2 hotels that we ran. And we've been highlighted on media, national news media, and the Secretary of Transportation and Housing from the state came and visited us a week and a half ago, and wants us to be the advisors, Union Station to be the advisors on rolling this out across the state and potentially across the country. So that's my little bragging. And it's really my staff who are my program staff who just did an amazing job with the folks moving in there. So
that's amazing. And congratulations to everyone, frankly, you know, it's like, because I know Union Station do a fantastic job. Actually, that reminded me, you're also on the Pasadena Mayor's Housing Task Force. So that's sort of obviously a local one, but yeah, anything, I don't want to ask you to reveal, I mean, you can't obviously reveal everything that's going on there, but how do you think that is going to sort of play out, or, you know, what is your main thing that you're trying to bring about with that from your perspective anyway?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think anything is secret. I think it's public knowledge. So this is to do with the housing element, the RHNA numbers. I don't know if people know, but the state requires every city in California to put together a plan, a housing plan. And the state has given each city the numbers that are required for that city to have in the housing pipeline. And in Pasadena, it's 9,000 units of housing. And a certain percentage, and again, this is prescribed by the state, not by Pasadena. There's a percentage of very low income, moderate, and market rate housing. And so, for example, in Pasadena, the rate of low income housing is about 6,000 out of the 9,000 units of housing. So the city has to put together a plan and send it to the state about how they're going to legitimately create 9,000 housing units. In the past, this was sort of an academic exercise that really didn't mean much. Cities did it, didn't mean much. The state has said now we are serious about this. Under Governor Newsom, he has taken on housing and homelessness as an issue. So when Pasadena was first told 9,000, they actually appealed. They said that's way too many. They lost the appeal, and so they had to put together this plan really quickly. And that's this housing task force, was community members kind of advising the city on developing this plan. You know, so I think it's great, and I'm appreciative that I was asked and a number of people were asked. I feel like it's happening so quickly because with the appeal, it got pushed back to the point where they have to put the numbers in this month to the state. And we've only had a couple of meetings. What a lot of people feel is going to happen is it will go to the state, and the state will probably come back and go, yeah, no, that's not good enough. And at which time then hopefully we'll really focus more on how do we get more affordable housing into Pasadena. And it's not just for extremely low income people experiencing homelessness. If you look at Pasadena and a lot of cities like this in California, you've got housing has become so expensive that people's children can't afford to buy houses there. Service workers can't afford housing, your nurses, your teachers, you know, all of these folks. So everybody has to commute long distances. People don't want to do that now. So you have this aging city where you actually don't, you know, schools having to close down because families can't afford to buy housing. So you really need to develop an entire pipeline all the way from extremely low income, all the way up through moderate, and then a small percentage of market rate. And of course, Pasadena, like so many cities, has done just the opposite. It's all of this extremely expensive market rate housing, and then they stick little bits. I think one of my goals is that every single district in the city should be required to make sure that they have enough affordable housing, because we know there are some districts that the city councilor just stonewalls. I don't think that should be allowed today. I think everybody should be forced to have it.
That sounds good.
Could I ask a question, please?
Go ahead, Joy. And then I have one for Sean, so I
just go ahead, Claire, if you want.
No, Joy, you go first.
Okay. Some time ago, there were articles in the local paper, or maybe in the LA Times as well, about the number of students, college students, who are homeless and living in their cars. Have you had any interaction with that group, or is that group just included in the general homelessness?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it's about 30% of college students right now in California experience housing instability and homelessness. Pretty shocking. We at Union Station don't work on youth homelessness. We have a sister organization that focuses, I mentioned earlier that funding and resources are divided by population. So there is a homeless services youth provider, and that's Hathaway Sycamores is the organization that does that here. We work with youth if they have children. Once they've had a child, they become part of our family system. So a 16-year-old girl, for example, who has a baby would then be in our system. Youth homelessness was something that was pretty much ignored across the country up until just the last decade or so. And when I was still working nationally, that was one of my key roles, was working on youth homelessness. So there's a lot more been done lately, but it's still incredibly under-resourced, and colleges, the cost of tuition, people can't afford housing, you know, it's one or the other. So again, it's that systems piece that's failing our students. And the colleges need to do more, I think, and there's not just colleges, but cities and the state need to be more to make sure that students don't, you know, have to choose between, do I eat a meal or do I, you know, pay my rent? And that's often the choice.
Did you say 30%? That was,
yeah,
that's
yeah, about 30%. Yeah,
it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
So my question for Sean, well, I guess for both of you, but it relates to what Sean was talking about, the myths, the myth busting slide. I think that's such an important one. And that the first two myths, the one that people choose to be homeless and people don't want to access services. And I think it's really telling that you say you've never met someone who didn't want to find a home and didn't want to access services, because that is so prevalent, that myth that goes around. It must drive you crazy when you see pundits or read news articles and people are claiming that, oh yeah, these people, they don't want to be helped. You know, how do you think, like, how do you think it's possible to fight that kind of misinformation?
Yeah, it is a big one, and it's such a challenge. And I think it is born out of, well, again, for, 40 years, we didn't offer homes. What we were offering people were programs, basically. And some of those programs or some of those shelter settings were very chaotic, and they didn't really have permanent housing attached to them. There was a lot of distrust created. And I think people who were experiencing homelessness just got burned out on having to jump through those hoops and not getting anywhere. And so I think the reason that myth persists is largely because that's our experience with folks who have been homeless, finally saying no to something that just never worked for them. Again, I think the way that we're combating it is getting this information out that really, for the first time ever in the history of homeless services, we're finally offering homes, and there's no conditions to going into one. You get to go into a home because by virtue of the fact that you don't have one and that you're a human being. But folks are just not up to speed, I think, on that being the new model. And there's this idea that Anne talked about, this kind of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and kind of earn what it is that you get. And so I think the idea that we're now offering homes, but we don't have them in numbers that will accommodate everybody. And in the meantime, people are being offered bridge housing or interim housing, crisis shelter, things like that. And some folks are actually choosing to say no to that because, first of all, it's not a home. And second of all, people, I think, know themselves best. Some people know what they can tolerate. They don't want to be in settings like that, especially in this past year, with COVID. It's a lot easier for people to sometimes be out on the street in a community, in an encampment, and that works better for them. And so we're trying to help people understand that, like, those folks are not precluded from moving forward into housing either. We'll work with you wherever you're at. the thing that we lack is actual housing. So as the numbers grow, I think people are associating this idea with us not getting everybody housed with people just not wanting to go inside, and it's absolutely not true.
I remember hearing or reading about people who, maybe it was one of you who told me this, but people who have a dog and they can't, they're only offered a place that won't accept dogs, and the dog literally saved their lives.
Yep.
On the street, and they're not going to just give up their dog,
Absolutely.
and that would make I mean, all these things make sense. I am extremely noise sensitive, and I don't think I could live in an apartment building, because I'd probably go crazy if I had to live in a really close proximity to other people. I'd probably go crazy, and I not trying to trivialize it, but I mean, honestly, I can imagine people being driven crazy by being pushed into a situation where they are, and it's all very well for people to say, oh, they should just put up with it because it's better than nothing, but it probably isn't for them.
Well, yeah, and that's such a great point. I think that we're making people who are probably the least able to jump through the hoops, we're making them jump through hoops that we ourselves are saying we won't or can't jump through. In the environment of stability that we're experiencing, we can't do those things, but we're asking people who are in the midst of this, existential crisis and trauma to do things that we're not even willing to do ourselves.
I'm following on from this idea of people in encampments. Is there anyone looking at a way to make places for encampments where it's safe for them? So just as even as a interim measure, is there some place that people could put up their tents waiting for a home, or that's
Yeah, and that's a really great idea, and I'm going to throw it over to Sean in a second to talk about the safe haven model.
Right.
I think one of the issues, there are things like safe parking where people can park their vans or their cars. The key element to a lot of the safety factor, but also just the ability to people to get out of that situation, is the service model. So what we want to try to do is there a place where you can have this safe encampment, but then also provide access to services for people and access to running water and sanitation services, because that's often the big thing. Again, it's trying to find places that communities will agree to allow that, because they see that as enabling. So we don't give them porta potties because that enables them, but then they complain of the fact that people have to use the streets. So, but Sean, you want to talk about safe haven?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that too. This, we talk about encampments being filthy and they're trash, ridden. But like Ann was saying, we very intentionally made it a point not to offer resources to people living on the streets in encampments. So, we're not offering trash bags, we're not offering trash cans, we're not offering bathrooms or sanitation. I think there's a recognition on our part that we absolutely have to provide those kind of quality of life interventions for people who are being literally forced to sleep outside because there is no housing. What we're currently doing is we're talking a lot, you'll hear about the pallet shelter projects, or these tiny home projects that are interim to help people get off the street inside to a little kind of singular shelter place where they can be while we're looking for the housing placement. And in the spirit of that, in Pasadena, we created a safe haven model with All Saints Church and United Methodist, where people can sleep, albeit outside, but in a safer environment with coordinated services, locker space, food, sanitation, porta potty, fresh water, and intensive wraparound services while they're in that place. And so that's just one intervention, of which we need lots more, but the idea is we need all types of models and all types of housing, everything from being able to serve someone who chooses to sleep in a doorway, to helping encampments stay healthy and safe, to bridge or pallet shelters, to crisis housing, We need all of these models in place to address the very unique and complex needs of individuals who have actually been traumatized out there on the street. And as Claire so eloquently put, there are only certain, we know what will work for us as individuals, so we need to have those models in place to offer people if we want to help them move forward.
Are there any other questions? Anyone want to speak up? I always have questions. Told you guys you'd have to shut me up.
I just wanted to say something to something Sean said, and it was a question from earlier. One of the, talking about sort of the service resistance piece and what can we do? One of the things that is we're finding very successful, and I think vital to what we're doing, is asking people who have lived the experience to talk about these kinds of things. And, Sean talked a bit about his own personal experience. Well, it's very hard for people to refute someone who says, I was there, I did it, I lived it, I experienced it. And so a lot of the work we're doing now is around how do we help and support people who have experienced homelessness to not just tell their stories, which is powerful, but also to advocate, be a voice. Because if I've lived on the streets for 10 years and you come to me and say, oh yeah, you didn't want services, and you say, are you kidding me? Of course I did, but what I was being offered wasn't helpful. So that's a lot of the work we're doing too. So we're just not telling other people's stories, but asking them to tell their stories.
So I was just going to mention, I just checked it up, not in detail. I think it was in Utah. A man opened his very large front yard to this was during COVID, to homeless people from the area who wanted to come and live there, and I think it got shut down by the local authorities, or they were going to keep people out, even though it was his own property, because it broke some kind of I'm sure there was a residential ban or something. So if people wanted to set up a safe haven, I mean, what were the hoops that had to be jumped through, if you like, for that? Was it different because it was a church property, or it was a business region, not a residential?
There were still a lot of hoops. Sean, I'll let you talk to that.
Yeah, we're still jumping through them. Yeah, there's a conditional use permit that is in the process of being approved that we're hoping will be approved. I think that it was because it was private property, and it was a church. It was tolerated at first more so, but yeah, there's still pushback happening. I think yeah, there's a lot of different hoops to jump through. We've applied for for a grant through the city to provide more intensive services, and that's been approved and awarded. So right now we're walking through the conditional use permit process. We're going to see what happens to that, and we're just trying to be as creative as we can in the meantime.
If there's anything that has changed in homeless services, we talked about asking people to jump through all the hoops, because basically it made life easier for all of us, whether you were the political figures or community members or even service providers. We put the onus on the people experiencing the problem to deal with the problem. Our whole philosophy now, and this is very strong Union Station philosophy, is it is our job to jump through the hoops. It's our job to clear the barriers. And then we walk beside people on their journey. And they are incredibly resilient, these folks. If you've survived on the streets, you are a strong and a resilient person. So we're not a nanny. We're not saying this is what you have to do, but we can help clear the pathway for people. And then again, they're the ones that are in control of their destiny and the path that they're walking. And we're there with them every step of the way to support them. But in the end of it, it is successful because it is the path they are choosing. And as Sean said, people want a home. They want to be there. So that's why our success rate is as high as it is because we take on the burdens so they don't have to, so that they can have the path clear in front of them.
Wow. That is incredible. extremely good news. Love to hear that.
It's really, I mean, it's a different topic really. There's a cop in Savannah, Georgia called Patrick Skinner who writes a lot on, I think I found him on Twitter, and he also has a large number of animals that he tweets about too. But anyway, he's always making the point that, you know, it's not that the police are serving the community. They are not, you know, they are, you know, the community are their bosses, and they need to accept that it's not an us against them, and it's not a, well, you have to abide by this and then we might let you, you know, live your lives. It has to be, you know, we need to find out what you need from us. And I think, you know, as they say, it's different. You know, I know homeless services weren't trying to police the population, but this idea that, you know, well, if you can't do the bureaucracy, how many times do you see this in TV shows and movies where someone's like stumped because they can't fill out the form and they just like go to the back of the line, and as someone said, it's like going through the DMV but times 100, and I can barely do my taxes. So you know, I just cannot imagine. In fact, I have been doing my taxes, and I have been I can't remember what the other form I was filling out, and I have been thinking that I'm pretty educated and I'm struggling with this stuff. And the healthcare, actually, that's the big one. I do not understand. I mean, I come from a country, the UK, with a national health service, and, you know, I have never had to deal with that before. And then coming out to the US, and that I cannot even imagine, even, you know, with Obamacare and everything, that's almost I mean, it's still incredibly complicated. So how, maybe I'm finally leading into a question here. How much does, you know, how many issues do you see that are involved with healthcare and people not being able to access it? I know you talked about, you know, mental health as well, but, you know, physical health and mental health, and trying to get through that system, that must be a huge amount of what you have to deal with and help people with.
Yeah, all of those systems are not created to deal with people who are very vulnerable. It certainly became better under Obamacare. There's no doubt about that. The access to medical care was better. But the medical system is also very highly prejudiced against people experiencing homelessness. So you hear a lot about how they're treated in the hospital or how they're treated by doctors. And that's a hard barrier to get over. I don't know, Sean, if you have any specifics, but
No, I think it's all that same stuff, you know. I have pretty good insurance, and I'll say that in September of last year, I started to my therapist died. And so a few months before, and I tried to get it back into therapy. And in December, I gave up trying, you know, after 4 months of just being, you know, and I know how to navigate these systems. And, you know, 4 months later, I just said, you know, I give up. I'm going to stop for now. And just recently I thought, okay, I'm going to give it another shot, you know, that's another 6 months later. And so I think there, you know, there's all sorts of barriers, you know, and it's not just the mental health system, it is the medical system. We know that people of color are treated differently within those systems than white folks. And so there, you know, yeah. And I agree, you know, affordable care really did create accessibility in ways that didn't happen before, but we're still talking about broken systems with lots of hoops to jump through.
Marnie, do you want to ask your question?
So I was wondering if literacy or English language skills are a big issue that people who are homeless or unsheltered in the Pasadena-Altadena area are facing. Do you see any of that with your clients, I believe? Would that be the term? The people with whom you're dealing?
Yeah.
yes, very definitely.
Well, yeah, both of those things, you know, and we have a large population of folks who are undocumented, and gratefully, there are a few programs that create access to folks who are undocumented, create pathways into housing, but those are limited, few and far between, and of course, at the end of the day, the housing doesn't exist again. Yeah, so, you know, we do have some interpretation services. Literacy is a big problem, being able to fill out forms. I mean, that's what we're there to largely help with. I always say that if, you know, the systems that were in place charged with helping people, you know, move forward into wellness and housing were doing the things they were being paid to do, we wouldn't, any of us have jobs, you know, but because they don't work. That's basically what we do. We show up in those ways and walk alongside people through all of those things. If we've worked with folks who are deaf, so it's about getting, you know, sign language people. A very small minority of folks are experiencing homelessness are Asian or Pacific Islander, and so we employ interpretation services in cases like that too. But largely we have, you know, a pretty large bilingual staff and have lots of different languages spoken at our agency as well.
I would say on top of that is a lot of the population we see, again, we think about those chronically homeless people, but we have a huge population, it's much larger actually, of people who are economically homeless. In other words, people who have either lost their job or just can't make enough money to pay rent. A lot of folks are actually working even multiple jobs, but the cost of living in LA is so high and wages are low. And often things like language and literacy can play into people's abilities to get better paying jobs. If English is not your first language, in the San Gabriel Valley, the Latino population is the highest population of those experiencing homelessness, which is different than most of LA, where it's actually African American. But in the San Gabriel Valley, it's the Latino population. Again, language becomes an issue. And another thing people don't talk a lot about, you hear a lot about mental illness. One of the things you don't hear a lot is that there is a large percentage of folks, especially in the chronically homeless population, who have learning disabilities. So it's not that they have mental illness per se, but, you know, dyslexia, all things like that, that prohibited them maybe from doing well in school, or now are in a position where it's hard to find a job that pays a decent amount of money to, again, afford to live. And learning disabilities are something that has been relatively recent in our history, that they really focus more attention, or things like autism or things like this. And there's a big population, this is really, really scary actually, of adults who have been looked after by their parents their whole lives because they have, you know, severe learning disabilities, or maybe it is mental illness. And when the parents die, suddenly their adult children who may be in their 50s or 60s end up becoming homeless. And so these are issues, and I think it expands that literacy piece. We have people who just struggle with learning, and for a variety of reasons. So it's not just accessing services, it's even if they can access services, they may be in a situation for their whole lives where they're going to need some kind of support because of those issues. Claire asked about the Friends of the Library. I mentioned earlier, libraries are one of the best resources for people experiencing homelessness. They have also been, if you didn't know this is a little factoid. They've done studies nationally to show what are the places that people experiencing homelessness trust the most to go for help. Guess what? It's not social service agencies, it's the library. Which, I mean, I'm a huge library fan myself. So, but it speaks to the environment is one that's considered safe. It is open to everybody. It is no cost to go in there. It has put pressure on a lot of libraries because you've had a lot of people who are on the streets who go in to get cool during the day or keep warm during the day or all of those things. So I think the more that libraries know how to work with this population and are connected to service providers, so that if they do see someone come in, there's someone you can call to say, hey, Joe comes in every day and he sits in the library. You know, to have one of our staff members or another service provider who can come in and just build that relationship, providing connections to resources for people. So I'm assuming you probably already have this stuff, brochures and pamphlets to say, here's someone you can call. Those are all incredibly helpful. And anybody who wants to do some volunteering, and, you know, there might be some options as things open up with COVID to do some interesting and innovative opportunities to do some sharing of some programs.
That sounds great. And I know Mark said right at the beginning about having, the newsletters in the library, and I think that would be terrific to spread the word. And I haven't been into the library for a long time, and I'm currently 5,000 miles away from it, but I know that Victor and Nikki, the library director, were talking about how they're doing these outreach. They're trying to do more outreach to the local population who may be either homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, and trying to provide more resources for them. So, and we'd also like to provide more resources for the friends, members, and the library users, so they can learn more about these issues, and so that they are hopefully, that's one of the idea of doing this sort of program, is to hopefully help educate people about the realities and not just those myths.
I also put a link in the chat, which is a online referral. If you have someone who is experiencing homelessness, whether you know them or you pass by them on the street every day, you're wondering if they're receiving services, you can fill that out, and it triggers a response from an outreach team. And of course, you can always call us if you have anything that you need, and we can link you to the appropriate people.
And if you ever want to do like a display, I know you go into some libraries and they'll have like a theme, let us know, because we could easily do like a theme poster and good books on homelessness. And there's a lot of stuff coming out there that's the alternative facts time that we're living in, but there's some really good resources too.
Actually, that was going to be a follow-up email after this. I wanted to go through the library's collection and find out what books they have, and we would have sort of very short list so far, Evicted and The Color of Law. I know there's a whole load of ones sort of on the general issue, but I was going to get ask if there were some suggestions, and then we can. The library is fantastic about adding books to the collection if they're recommended. So
yeah, we have
great.
a huge reading list too that we.
I should already know it. I'm sure it's on the website or something. So I should have probably already be able to find that. But that would be great.
Yeah, that would be fun. That's okay.
All right, we're headed for 2 p.m. there, and we've kept you for a very long time. So, is there any last questions from anybody, or anything that you or Anne or Sean would like to finish up by saying to us?
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Well, you probably said that, but I still didn't get it. What can I do as an individual to help support the organization?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. So we always talk about sort of three areas of support. One is volunteering. We love and we thrive on our volunteers, and we have a volunteer portal on our website. You can go all sorts of different opportunities for volunteering. And again, as COVID starts to, hopefully die down, we'll have more opportunities for volunteers to come back. I think that as people get to know some of the people we work with, some of our clients, it's pretty transformative in how they view homelessness. So again, we love our volunteers. Obviously a nonprofit, we can always take financial donations. Again, something on our website, it's easy to do. The other piece that is becoming increasingly important, and this is Sean's role, and that is advocacy. And so where you have the opportunity to speak out at your local town meetings or with neighbors and talk about what you've learned about homelessness, people have asked me on many occasions, what is it going to take to end homelessness in our communities? And my answer is very simple. It's recognizing the humanity in all people. And the more you can talk to others about these are human beings, these are our fellow human beings, and they deserve lives of dignity. And yes, they may look really rough, but you would look really rough too if you didn't have a bathroom or a shower for 3 weeks. I think that is probably one of the most important things. So find out as much information as you can and be willing to advocate. Sean has a whole group, an advocacy group, if you're interested in finding out more from him. We do things like if issues are coming up at city meetings, city council, town meetings, the more voices we can get out there to say yes in my backyard, the better.
And what would you do as a volunteer at the center?
So again, we have lots of opportunities, anything from our Adopt a Meal, which is cooking a meal for our folks who are living in interim housing. And you can either do that from home and drop it off as things are safer. You can come in with a group of people. It's a lot of fun, and we work with you to prepare a meal and serve it. Donations of certain items, and there's a list on our website of what specific things we need. So we do welcome home kits for people moving into housing. You can get a group together and put together some welcome home kits. We need office staff. So if you have a day and you say, hey, I'm retired and I want to come in for a day, we can get you working in the office. We can get people doing phone calls. We have events committees. If you like to plan parties, we have events. We have committees like our advocacy committee. So there's a whole, anything from, hey, I have professional knowledge about this and I'd love to offer my services, tutoring some of our clients, like helping us with all sorts of administrative stuff, down to food and serving a meal. So it really depends what interests you, and our volunteer department can kind of go through all of those options with people.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. I read that book, Evicted, and it really puts a personal face on homelessness.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you recommended that book.
Yeah, that's a great book. Disturbing, but great.
Yes.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been such a joy. I'm so appreciative of the chance to come and talk about our passion. But again, it's people like all of us who really will make a difference, and just keep holding those politicians' feet to the fire that they make the right decisions going forward.
Good to see everybody. Thanks for having us. Thanks for all that you do too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
group.
Thank you so very much. That was terrific. It really was.
Yeah, it really, really.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Well, it's probably up to me then to
It is.
take
I
the
hand the reins over to you.
Well, let me first thank Annie and Sean for the most important talk I've seen in a very long time. It was really inspiring and really enlightening. And we've gained so much from it. Thank you for your brilliant work at Union Station. And I would have many people to thank before we close. Victor Sherborg for your presentation. It was so great to hear all the things that you're doing and that we're helping with. That's lovely. Thanks. And I'd like to thank the audience for coming. Thank you. It's good to see you. I need to thank our outgoing president, Marnie. I've written this down so I can get it right, who expertly guided us through a most difficult year while having a huge workload. She captained our ship calmly over troubled waters.
Thank you.
Yeah, great president, and they're big shoes to fill.
And for the first time, did Marnie keep us going calmly over troubled waters? So thank you again.
I couldn't have done it without the group as a whole. And Claire, Jeanette, Sally, Joy, I mean, I couldn't have gotten through this last year without your support. So I thank you very much.
Excellent. And I'd like to also thank Claire, whose mighty efforts were behind this event, and also while having a huge workload and on Mars. So, you know, that was a big tribute for her. And I want to welcome our new Vice President, Joy, who contributes in so many ways to our organisation, whether she's on the board or not, on an elected officer or not. And for Jeanette for continuing to take the treasurer's job, even though it's such a hard, rotten job. And, you know, you do a great job. So thanks, Jeanette. And as the president of the Friends, new president of the Friends of the Altadena Library, I will complete my first official task by closing the meeting. Thank you all so much.